2 years organizing across Mississippi, 3,000 plus meetings, petitions, door-to-door conversations, zero national press coverage. Beaten bloody on courthouse steps. That same afternoon, he walked back inside to continue registering voters. Robert Paris Moses, born Harlem, 1935, a mathematics teacher who became the most dangerous man to segregation. A housing project on East 144th Street raised him concrete corridors, overcrowded apartments, survival as the baseline. By all accounts, Moses was different, quiet, deliberate, wearing identical dark clothes like armor against distraction. Those who knew him watched his hands constantly move, gesturing, calculating, solving equations only he could see. Harvard accepted him for graduate philosophy. Yet today, almost nobody, not your neighbors, not your teachers, knows his name. Why? Because his story was erased. In Liberty, Mississippi, the courthouse was a fortress. White officials controlled every voter registration form, every decision, every no. Walking through those doors meant everyone in the county would know, and knowing carried consequences. Moses understood it too. Moses went back 3 times before August 29th, 1961, each attempt a calculated risk, each rejection a deliberate humiliation. Blocked, stalled, turned away. The pattern repeated like a ritual, designed to break him. On the 4th visit, Billy Jack Caston was waiting a white man with violence ready in his hands. Caston's cousin led the White Citizens Council. That connection meant the beating would go unwitnessed, unpunished. The knife handle connected with Moses' skull. He felt the crack, tasted blood, stayed conscious through the rage. Moses pressed his shirt to the wound. He walked through it. He walked into the registrar's office, with blood still on his shirt. Liberty, Mississippi, a town where the name was the cruelest kind of joke. Moses was not fearless. People who worked alongside him said he was visibly shaken after the attack. He sat with other organizers that night and said very little. The room was hot, a single bulb overhead, the windows open to a Mississippi August. He could have gone back to New York. Harvard was still there. His graduate program was still there. He chose to stay. He filed a federal complaint afterward and went back to the county the following week. That decision shaped the next 3 years of American voting rights history. But the cost was coming, and Moses likely knew it. The people who helped Moses were in more danger than Moses himself. A black man from New York had some small protection from national attention. The people beside him had none. Herbert Lee was a father of 9. He had been helping Moses with voter registration work in Amite County for months. Mississippi State Legislator E.H. Hurst was waiting for him one morning. Hurst shot Herbert Lee in the head, in broad daylight, in front of witnesses. An all-white coroner's jury ruled it justifiable homicide within hours. Within hours. No trial. E.H. Hurst returned to the Mississippi State House after the shooting. He served out his term. One of the witnesses, a black man named Lewis Allen, told Moses what he had actually seen. Allen said the shooting was not self-defense. Louis Allen was killed in 1964 before he could testify federally. Moses had shared meals at Lee's house. Lee's children had seen Moses across their family table. After Lee was killed, Moses kept organizing in Amite County. He later said that Herbert Lee's death was something he carried every single day, not metaphor. A weight he named specifically, more than once in the years that followed. Herbert Lee was murdered. Louis Allen was silenced before he could testify. This wasn't random, it was systematic terror designed to prevent black votes. It was a functioning apparatus, backed by elected officials, a jury pool, and a state legislature. Moses filed federal complaints about Herbert Lee's death. The Justice Department, under Attorney General Robert Kennedy, did not bring charges. Moses kept going anyway. And then he started building something that would force the entire country to look at Mississippi. Freedom Summer emerged from Moses' strategic planning in spring 1964. The idea was direct: bring hundreds of volunteers into Mississippi to register black voters, not dozens of organizers working quietly on back roads. Hundreds of mostly white college students, visible, impossible to ignore. Moses made a calculation about that visibility. He understood that white America paid attention when white bodies were in danger. That logic was cold, And he knew it was cold, and he used it anyway. Because the goal was not purity. The goal was the vote. Freedom Summer was not one event. It was a coordinated structure built from the ground up over months. SNCC and the Council of Federated Organizations, a Mississippi coalition of civil rights groups, ran the logistics together. Moses was at the center of that planning. He sat in meetings in church basements, his notebook open, writing in his precise small hand. People who worked with him said he rarely raised his voice in those rooms. He would ask a question, wait, ask another question. And by the end, the group had solved its own problem. That was how he led. Not from a stage, from a folding chair. Volunteers trained in Oxford, Ohio before deployment. They were told what to expect, and most of them did not believe it until they arrived. Mississippi saw 67 church burnings and bombings during 1964. 67. Not a symbol. A count of buildings, congregations, and community centers reduced to ash. Each one had been a meeting place, a safe room, a location on a map that mattered. Now here is what happened before the summer even started. 3 activists left Meridian on June 21, 1964. James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner were investigating arson at a church near Philadelphia, Mississippi. Deputy Cecil Price from Neshoba County stopped their vehicle. He released them after dark, then had them followed. Klan members intercepted the car on a rural road. All 3 men were beaten and shot. An earthen dam held their bodies for 44 days before federal investigators found them. Moses was in a room in Mississippi with other SNCC organizers when the call came in. He did not leave the room for a long time afterward. One person who was there said Moses sat at the table and put his hands flat on the propane surface. He did not speak for several minutes. Then he said they had to keep going, not because the danger was acceptable, because stopping was the outcome the violence was designed to produce. He recognized the mechanism. It was the same one that had killed Herbert Lee. Kill someone connected to the work. Wait for the organizers to scatter. Announce that order has been restored. Moses refused to let it play out the same way again. So Freedom Summer continued. Across Mississippi that summer, Freedom Summer established 41 freedom schools. Roughly 3,000 Black students attended. They studied literacy, yes, but also the Constitution, their legal rights, and the history of Black political organizing. For many students, this was their first book containing their own history. Imagine being 14 years old in 1964 Mississippi, watching adults beaten for trying to vote, understanding that courage alone won't protect you. The entire educational system had been built to keep that book out of their hands. Then someone sat across from you with a different set of materials entirely. The freedom schools were not a side project. Volunteers taught in church halls, on porches, sometimes outdoors under trees. At the same time, voter registration drives moved through the state. Canvassers knocked on doors in counties where knocking on doors had gotten people killed. They brought forms, explained the process, and offered to walk people to the courthouse. The state of Mississippi responded with systematic legal obstruction and violence. Local officials changed registration requirements without notice. Landlords evicted Black families who attempted to register. The violence did not come only from the Klan. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had agents in Mississippi during Freedom Summer. Those agents observed incidents and took notes. They were under orders from Director J. Edgar Hoover not to intervene in local law enforcement matters. Hoover had publicly called the FBI a fact-gathering agency, not a police force. That position meant federal agents watched beatings and did not stop them. That was not a failure of the system. That was the system doing precisely what it was built to do. Moses filed complaints with the Justice Department throughout the summer. Attorney General Robert Kennedy's office received those complaints and largely did not act on them. And while all of this was happening, Robert Moses kept his name out of the national press. History would later make sure it stayed there. The Voting Rights Act passed in August 1965. Moses had spent 4 years building toward that moment. He was not on the stage when Lyndon Johnson signed it. He was not in the photograph. The photograph showed elected officials, cameras, and men who opposed the work until safe. Moses watched the coverage from a distance. People who were with him that week said he was quieter than usual. That is saying something, because he was never loud. The act delivered exactly what Moses and other organizers had demanded since the early 1960s. Federal oversight of voter registration in states with histories of discrimination. Federal examiners empowered to register voters directly. Suspension of literacy tests, the tool used most often to block black voters at the door. Moses had outlined each of these needs in federal complaints going back 4 years. What changed was not the argument. The argument had always been correct. What changed was the visibility. Freedom Summer had put white college students from Princeton and Yale in front of Mississippi state troopers. The national press had cameras rolling when those students were arrested. Moses had calculated that outcome deliberately, and he was right. And it cost him something he never fully named. He left SNCC in 1965. He had grown troubled by certain leadership decisions within the organization, and he recognized that his own public profile had become a problem. He had a specific philosophy about leadership, one he had practiced since his first summer in Mississippi. Power should move outward, not inward. The organizer should build capacity in the community, then step back. His influence had grown past the point where stepping back was possible inside the organization, so he departed entirely. His family relocated to Tanzania in 1966. He taught school there for several years. Freedom Summer's story was told repeatedly in books, documentaries, and university courses. The names that appeared most often in those retellings were not his. Martin Luther King's assassination came in 1968. John Lewis, who had worked alongside Moses in SNCC, became a congressman and eventually a symbol of the entire movement. Both men earned their place in history. Moses's role in designing the structure that made that history possible was quietly set aside, one editorial choice at a time. By 1980, his name had largely disappeared from popular accounts of the civil rights movement, not erased in a single decision by a single institution. Faded through accumulation. 100 choices about which names to include in a paragraph, which photographs to caption, which interviews to seek. Each choice seemed small. The result was a generation that grew up knowing Freedom Summer happened and not knowing who built it. Moses returned to the United States in the 1970s and eventually developed a mathematics education program called the Algebra Project. He founded it in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1982. The logic was the same logic he had used in Mississippi. Give a community the tools to understand its own situation, and it can act on its own behalf. In Mississippi, the tool was a voter registration form and someone willing to walk to the courthouse. In Cambridge, the tool was algebra and the argument that mathematical literacy was a civil right. Moses spent the next 30 years in school serving low-income black students, unyielding. He sat at tables with 12-year-olds, the same way he had sat on porches with farmers. The notebook was still open. The handwriting was still precise and small. He did not pursue recognition for this work. He did not find much of it. Moses died on July 25, 2021, in Hollywood, Florida. He was 86 years old. Most major outlets ran obituaries of 400 to 600 words. The Voting Rights Act he helped make possible has generated millions of words of scholarship and commentary. In 2013, the Supreme Court struck down a central provision of that act in Shelby County versus Holder. That provision had required states with histories of voter discrimination to get federal approval before changing their voting laws. Within 24 hours, several states implemented restrictions they'd previously been blocked from enacting. North Carolina cut early voting days and eliminated same-day registration. Texas moved forward with a strict photo identification requirement. These were not new ideas. They were the old ideas, returned. His complaints from the 1960s had described counties where black voters were removed from rolls on invented technicalities, flimsy pretexts that haunted democracy for generations. 60 years later, the word for that practice is caging. Research spanning 2016 through 2022 documented the same systematic patterns in modern purge data. The mechanism is updated. The function is the same. Mostly black districts experience higher registration elimination rates than mostly white ones. Moses understood something that took the rest of the country decades to catch up to. The vote is not the end of the fight. The vote is the floor. Keeping it requires the same kind of organized, unglamorous, persistent work that he did in Mississippi, in Cambridge, at tables with people most institutions had already written off. He entered a Liberty, Mississippi courthouse, bloodied, and filed a voter registration attempt. That courthouse is still standing. The voter registration office is still inside it. The story of Robert Paris Moses was never an accident of forgetting.